Hi, it's Darren here from People Purpose Place. I'm super stoked to have the three Amigo back in the same location, virtual location, that is. And I think we've got some really, really good conversation to dive into today. And because we're sort of catching up for the first time again, we had a bit of a today and thought that we might be able to maybe summarize our experiences over the last week and keep them somewhat aligned with what Colby and I conversation was last week, which is what do humans want from their housing, which I think Rowan's been very cunning in regards to his way of using the words there. But I thought we might be able to summarize that and talk about our week. So how are you, Rowan and Christine?
Doing okay.
It's good.
I think you're just a little bit glitchy, Darren. Can you? You're just there's a little bit of lag or something.
Yep.
Can you do something about that? And
Yeah,
am I coming across okay?
Loud and clear, Christine. Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Good.
Just open the door and we'll see how that internet works with a clear path. Is that any better?
I think that's better.
There you go.
I think that's better. Yep.
Awesome. So going along our normal customary start to the episode, and we have our check-in question, and following on with the same lines that we talked about with the idea of this being about humans, can we name one human experience that you've had this week which has been enlightening or refreshing? Rowan, did you want to go first?
Wow. While I've been working on my tan in Bali, I've had an immeasurable number of refreshing experiences. And I guess fundamentally it comes back to the youth, around me, that there's a younger generation who, as much as I don't get them, and they probably don't get me, but they do some awesome community stuff in their own way. I don't see or recognize it as that, but they do some very cool, inclusive, it's just ingrained in their nature, which has been really, really heartwarming to see.
Yeah, awesome.
So, that's my check-in.
Do you want to go next, Christine, or do you want me to go? Which works?
Yeah, you go ahead, Darren.
I obviously had a great week last week. Got up to catch up with a few of the crew from People Purpose Place, including Christine last week, while Rowan was taking in the sun on the beaches. But on my way home, a schoolmate of mine who, I don't know how this works, but he was actually born on the same day I was, about a year or 2 years older than me. And we went to school together, and we had done some business over the years together. And he had a career at that stage in real estate sales. So he's the enemy. No, he wasn't the enemy. But he was certainly right up there in the capitalist climbing area. And I caught up with him and his wife in Cairns, and we had a really good in-depth conversation about a few things. But the most impressive thing for me is from someone coming from that background. He's thrown in that career. He's always had a passion for martial arts, and he's opened a dojo in Cairns, specifically with the goal of helping children and young people learn a martial art, learn the discipline that goes with that. And he's sort of acknowledging that he's never going to get rich doing that, but it's given him a sense of purpose and fulfillment doing that. So that was something that I thought, I didn't know, knowing him in a younger version, I was never quite sure I was ever going to see him in that position, but it was really heartwarming and enlightening to see him and his wife both get to that point. So that was certainly my experience for the week.
Yeah, that's pretty beautiful.
So he was drawing people together to a place because he had a purpose. So it just fits totally into our theme, doesn't it? People, purpose, place.
100%.
How many layers there are, and how you have to move through developmental layers before you can come to purpose being really important in a wider sense than just money, success, stuff, accumulating stuff. We're all good at that. We're too
Yes,
good at that.
absolutely.
But I think that leads into perfectly into what I feel like was my most intense experience of the week, which was our meeting on Thursday, where we had 7 very keen people purpose placers,
Mhm.
everybody who's been involved in this, except Rowan, who was off doing other stuff and having other experiences. And one of the things that I found terribly interesting about that, there were 7 of us, 4 of whom have some sort of chronic, more or less civilizational disease, autoimmunity, myalgic encephalomyelitis, clonus. I mean, all these weird diagnoses, 4 of us, Lyme
Yeah.
disease. And there was a certain level, it was a very interesting conversation to me, and I'd love to pick it apart a little further than, I mean, this is my answer to the check-in question, but I'd love to carry on with this conversation if it seems appropriate, because there was a real practical level of, we were getting some work done, we were doing some planning, we were moving people purpose place forward, we were moving a particular project forward, we were coming together on everybody knowing where the projects would be located, what the places looked like, who the people might likely be, what the purpose was. But there were layers underneath that, and part of what was so fascinating about that was how really there were 7 of us, some of whom we had not met each other before in person. We'd all met each other online or in some form, but there was an emotional alignment going on, and it was fascinating to me because we were, there was such a preponderance of people who've gone through some really difficult health struggles, one of whom his whole life. Your wife, for example, Darren, only recently, me a little bit longer, and then one of our other very close people purpose place, not-for-profit people, only quite recently has become quite disabled. And the interesting thing that I'd love to pull apart if we can, and Rowan wasn't there, so it's a little unfair, but this feeling of how 7 people were really our real business was emotionally aligning, and how much openness to that there was, and how much empathy and compassion there was from everybody to everybody else. It was really quite an interesting meeting. I'm so sorry you missed it, Rowan, because there was a feeling of evolving in the meeting. How did you feel about that, Darren?
Yeah, and I think you've articulated it fantastically. And I think it is very interesting. And as you said, the multiple layers was the very interesting component. And then in what is relatively a short period of time, like literally we were only together in that situation for, maybe a couple of hours. But as you said,
certainly not more than a couple of hours. It was,
absolutely. And even, to some extent, we didn't really have a set meeting structure. We didn't follow any of those things, but those clearly defined paths that we stepped through still had this combining level of understanding, which was maybe just shared by our group experience. And I think, I wonder whether, and this might be a question back to you, Christine, I wonder whether because we're able to share our human experience in its most painful of human experiences, which is real health issues, whether that was able to give us a level of trust between us that maybe we wouldn't have had if we hadn't have shared those things. And this is even hard for me as a husband. I mean, obviously, my wife has.
Oh, that internet.
You've glitched out again, Darren, but that's okay. You'll come back in a minute.
That's frustrating when that happens, but it's
working to find a way to understand that. but by all of us
I think
sharing
Darren's going to have to repeat that because we missed a whole bit of audio, don't you think, Rowan?
yeah, did you hear?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
No,
Sorry.
we missed a bit. Can you just run that through past us
Yeah,
again,
sure.
please? Because it
Yeah.
glitched out.
Yeah, so my point was probably that by sharing our humanness, it gave us an opportunity to find a place that was more combined. So,
Yep.
and as I was sort of saying, even from my own point of view, like yourself and Russell probably have greater synergies having a shared health issue or some shared health repercussions. And myself, as I was mentioning, it's sometimes hard as a husband of someone who has autoimmune to really be able to understand that because I don't.
Yeah.
I'm fit, I'm healthy, and I don't have those issues. So sometimes it's hard to understand that. Whereas you all were able to share that because you're in that experience. So my question back to you was, do you find by our ability to have enough trust to share stuff that we normally wouldn't share with others?
Yes, I think so. And I think that's a really important point. But the other really important point is that there was nobody particularly young in that crowd. I think the youngest person might have been Fiona, but the youngest one that I know the age of was 54, 56 or something. So
Yes.
it's, everybody was over the half century mark. I'm 73, so I'm at the 3/4 century mark. But everybody had, and each one of the people there had really dedicated a great deal of their life to finding their purpose, to becoming purposeful, to finding a place where they felt they could act out their purpose at whatever time of life they were in. And I think that it's that inner work that each one of us had done separately, plus the empathy that we developed, some of us only because we've been ill,
Yes.
the compassion that we developed for ourselves and for each other. And so
Yes.
it seems to me that there was a magic about that conversation that is exactly the magic, a quiet magic. Nothing, no poppers and no bubbles and no sparkles and nothing like that. No fireworks, but just this beautiful, quiet alignment that was working out through everything we were doing as we went along. And it was so interesting and so touching to see the care that each person was extending to the next. And
Yes.
I think I'd like to connect this to Rowan's experience on Bali, perhaps, because I haven't been to Bali in 35 years.
Yes.
The first time I went there was soon after I came to Australia. So it was like 50 years ago. Bali was a different
They tell me it's changed.
It was different. Everybody stayed in a loman. There was only a toilet. There was a hole in the floor. Everybody washed with a bucket. There was a big hotel somewhere, but none of us travelers, we were disdained all that kind of thing. And there was that entire Balinese surroundings where you have that same feeling of this whole society had aligned itself. And I'm sure that's changed a bit, but I'll bet there's something left of that group emotional, spiritual alignment that the Hindus of Bali really have developed to this very high, beautifully artistic, wonderfully expressive degree. Now, Rowan, I'm not sure how that felt to you because I know you were staying in a hotel that didn't have a hole in the floor as a toilet and things like that. But that was my first experience of Bali was, this is the first time I've been to Asia proper.
Yeah.
And 48 years ago. So it was quite a different experience for me, but I'm sure that feeling of connection,
there's a very strong sense of community, there still. And although it was expressed to me, so I was trying to understand, and a large focus was about relaxing and spending some time with my partner, which was wonderful. But trying to understand the local conditions from a local's perspective was just
Yeah.
my interest, what's housing,
Yeah.
what's facilities, what's life like. And there are some enormously stark differences. We have a sense of frustration about our glitchy internet. In this modern,
Yeah.
advanced nation of Australia, we've spent all this money on this damn internet. We still can't get it stable.
Yeah.
Bali, they don't have a fridge in their house
But still,
today.
wow.
4 million residents on the island of Bali, which is the population of Queensland. They don't have trains. They don't have a fridge. So that's, some of the have-nots.
Yeah.
Pretty stark.
Yeah.
In the hotel, you still use bottled water.
Yeah.
Because water supply is not sufficiently. Don't drink ice in anything.
No.
So, that's the level of, okay, there's some things they don't have. Then we went and spent some time in the community we did an e-bike tour, which was hilarious. Some of us hadn't been on a push bike in 20 plus years. So that was also pretty exciting.
And the traffic's a little different there.
Exactly. And we were saying confidently to ourselves, they're not going to put us on the main road going past out the front of this premises here, because that would be nuts.
But they did.
We strapped our helmets on and went straight out on the main road. And I've got to say that any Australian driver would look at that road and say, it's at best a 2-lane road, at the very best, with no footpaths. You can get 4 vehicles across that, no worries. So,
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
and some of those vehicles are scooters with the whole family. Dad's driving with a durry. Junior's standing on the foot pegs in between his legs.
Yeah.
Junior number 2 is behind him on the seat, and Mum's sitting side saddle, texting on the phone. Nobody's wearing a helmet.
Yeah. Nobody's got a helmet. So they only have flip flops on.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
And I'm old and slow and hop straight into that traffic on a push bike, and nobody gave me any aggro. Now, if you take that to Australia, if you hopped into a traffic situation and were unskilled, slow, don't know what you were doing, you would immediately be road raged. It would just be like someone would take my head off in 5 minutes flat.
Yeah.
But the experience was amazing. We had a guide at front and a guide at the back. They said, stay on the left, and the traffic will work its way around you. And it did.
And it did. And it did.
And I still don't know how they missed us.
Yeah, but they were aligning themselves to you, just like we were in that meeting.
Yeah.
Australia is not the most road ragey country there is. I mean, this is a very friendly, very easygoing country. That's our reputation. But there's still more road rage than there is in Bali, and the traffic is horrendous on Bali, and it certainly isn't in far north Queensland.
No.
So
some of the meeting conversation, you talk about the emotional alignment. I'm absolutely convinced there's a level of alignment when people are actively driving, because it is a state of flow. There's no rules. You'll come to an intersection with traffic lights and 4 policemen, and that's all sort of superfluous and in the background.
Yes, because everybody just keeps going.
We get our way through here. How we get our way through here. If old mate wants to go against the traffic on the inside on the left lane, that's okay. So he doesn't have a helmet, and he's got the missus on the back, and Billy Lid standing on the foot pegs. That's fine. Why wouldn't you?
But what do you put the lack of anxiety to? Is it because there's so other little rules around that they don't feel flustered? Because I'm still intrigued by that, because we would normally find a fair level of anxiety just from pure chaos, which was maybe it's. Yeah,
I was definitely anxious as a passenger in a car, picked up from the airport in a car. My first look at it was like, oh my God, someone's going to get killed.
Yeah. But they don't have, actually we have probably just as bad a death rate. I think there are a lot of accidents there, but you know,
They're probably generally
But-
slower, and they're generally
yeah, exactly.
lighter vehicles,
Yeah.
scooters and such.
But I have an anecdote from going to China that might illuminate that a little bit.
Mm.
My first time in China was in 1987. Now, they hadn't left bicycles behind in 1987 because you know
Yeah.
how, I mean, the Chinese have basically industrialized in less than 2 generations.
Yes.
Nobody has ever done it that quickly. I mean, it took the English 7 generations. It took the Americans 4 generations. It's only taken the Chinese 1 generation to industrialize. They may collapse as quickly. Who cares? I mean, we all care, but
Yes.
who knows? Let's put it that
Yes,
way.
yes,
Who
yes.
cares? But in fact, watching all those cyclists in Shanghai, where we first landed, was this most amazing experience of watching an entire group of people. I mean, handlebar to handlebar. Now, I would have crashed and burned. Handlebar to handlebar across this immense thoroughfare, but packed with bicycles, no cars, just packed with bicycles, and everybody's sort of swaying like this.
Yep.
So the whole lot of them are swaying in this incredible alignment of focus, purpose, and also feeling into everybody else. Because you know how it is. If you're on a bike and somebody hits your handlebars, you're over. And in a case like that, there'd be 3,000 people on the ground. Everybody had to be very aware of what everybody else was doing. Now, here's an interesting point. People all think the Chinese are terrible drivers in cars. I went back to China 20 years later. Oh, actually, not even 20 years later. And everybody was driving a car because they had industrialized. And they were doing the same thing.
Wow.
They were all swaying along with each other, not necessarily bumping each other's bumpers the way we would. They had that same aligned sensibility of flowing like a river. It was fascinating. And I
definitely
thought,
times when
drivers, they are very attuned, aligned drivers. They're attuned to everybody else. And it came from riding bicycles in crowded thoroughfares. How fascinating is that? And the Balinese have come up with their own. I mean, the first time I went to Mexico City, which is practically 100 years ago, it was before I came to Australia, so 60 years ago. Everybody was beeping and honking and running into each other, and around they go, and traffic circles, and it was chaos, noise, and dirt, and screeching, and all kinds of brakes on. Nothing like that in Bali. Nothing like that in China. I just think that's a fascinating example of how you can align and work together, or just be grumpy.
There were times that I was looking at it like there's no way this number of people can coexist on this patch of road, and it was almost like a choreographed dance. From you know, if you'd said these people have practiced this, but clearly they haven't. They're just to and from work, going about their business, and someone's texting the missus for what's on for dinner. I saw a kid standing on the front of the scooter, old enough that the handlebars came to here. So she's 3 or 4, and she's got a school notebook up with the crayon, doing these numbers, colouring it in.
Oh, really?
Well, Dad's driving. Something's on the back. You go, what the hell?
And the thing is that, of course, all of those experiences that you've had or that I've had in other countries, or that we had on Thursday, Darren and I, with these 5 other people, it was about finding alignment. And this, I believe, is why we find this all very striking. This is why we've come together, is to find alignment and to find other people who want to find some kind of emotional alignment so we could flow like a river together. And of course, a flowing river hits rocks and it looks pretty crazy for a while. So you can't expect it to be always flowing peacefully, but they have
they've done things that no Westerner has ever figured out.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
And
that's
it's our obligation to sink into that and find alignment.
yeah, 100%.
I do wonder at the same time, I've been reading, which is related, about the automobile rollout post World War II. Now, lots of these, China didn't have that.
No.
Bali hasn't had that. They've got cars now, but still predominantly scooters. And that has constrained our whole living in a home, getting around paradigm, particularly in Australia. Australia's a particularly bad example of being car-centric. Whereas other, and particularly older European cities and other cultures that haven't been so car-centric, out of necessity, you don't have this metal box of protection around you. You're actually bumping shoulders with someone who's pedaling a bike next to you. So there's a more intimate connection. You know, some of that makes sense just from a personal proximity. But it also changes your background fundamental, that the only way I'm going to get from point A to point B is to get along with the traffic. So I better get in the left-hand side of the river if it's flowing that way, rather than being in a tin box expecting to be safe and I'll just bounce off things till I get there.
And being angry if you can't.
The whole anger thing was just did not exist.
It's amazing.
I had some funny observations of a chap getting upset about not getting sufficiently fast bar service. And
this is a Westerner, I take it, a tourist.
Aussie, doing us proud.
Oh dear, doing us proud.
And he was right. I have done some hospitality work, and he was getting atrocious service because he had prepaid and it was only hand out so many drinks, and once the time has passed, we'll then maybe up our pace of service. But he's had a couple of drinks, that'll do him for now. So this Aussie, and there's pluses and minuses, both of those sides of that conversation. If you can be explicit and clear, then nobody's going to get upset about it. But anyway, clearly there was a discontent. But even with an angry, upset, hurt feelings, this is not good enough sort of aggression in his face, absolutely not bothered by it, not fazed by it. Every other customer got completely the same beautiful, welcoming smile, and it was all about, this is just a moment. It's no reason for me to change my behaviour or ruin my day over it. Whereas the Aussie was carrying it around for hours later, and I'm going, dude, you're on holidays, unwind.
Yeah.
And you think that's because
you're on holidays in a place where you could learn something from these beautiful people who are so harmonious, and he wasn't going to learn the lesson.
No, he's not the learning type.
Right. But we want to be with the learning types, and we want to be learning. And I think that's the important thing, is that when you have a moment of alignment, like we had on Thursday, like you were feeling on Bali, like you had with your mate who had come to purpose, like you have, Darren. At those moments, that's where you learn deeply what it means to be more aligned. And if we don't learn that, we're never going to make a success of this people, purpose, place project.
100%. And I also think along that same line, the learning stuff. So I was interested that, also during that conversation, we had people there who probably didn't know much about what we were doing, like ultimately the people, purpose, place stuff. But interestingly enough, I found even, Jane, my wife, who hasn't been engaged in it, was still like, oh, that's really interesting, and was trying to understand the application of some of the things we were talking about. And Russell in particular was, and we started to have that conversation about saying, the people who we think are best going to suit where we're going to are the people who are moving on from this self-improvement into this self-awareness space. So if you're more self-aware, and we talked about that podcast with Seam where the bloke was talking about the unfolding rather than this self-improvement thing where you're just trying to get better and better. I need to be better at this.
Whereas I need a new skill.
Correct.
I need a new skill.
Correct. Whereas self-awareness or unfolding might be an acceptance of who we are. And by accepting who we are, we can then fully be ourselves. And that, I think, also then gives us the ability to work better with others if we're fully accepting of our good parts and our bad parts and our triggers and our, prehistory and all that sort of stuff. So I think even that, as you said, the shared learning to get to that same place really also helps you to be on the same page, because we have all these, top level, high level, how are you today? Good, thanks. We don't often get into those in-depth conversations about, who are you as a person and what does that mean to speak to other people?
And who are we right now together?
Yeah.
Because that's the whole Balinese road situation, isn't it? Who are we on this road, all cooperating with each other?
Yep.
Yeah.
So, it's inspiring to see. They do we actually got to see their place of, this small community went and saw their place of burial and cremation, and the weekend just gone, they'd had a cremation. So it's a central place, and just describing the process and the respect that, because we're poor, we wait for there's enough people have passed in the village. So typically that's every 4 years, and we dig them all up and we have a group cremation, so there's this practical saves the dollars, but there's still this very connected, and we're honouring the dead and honouring our community by having following the ritual and the process.
Is that a Hindu process? Is that a Hindu?
Yeah, it's a Hindu culture. Although not particularly, most people aren't particularly religious, but every community will have temples, and they have a lot of display and ritual, but not necessarily every Saturday morning going to church or every Sunday morning going to church, or not necessarily not eating beef or whatever. Yeah, they're pragmatic about it as well. So
you're saying they would actually, like, if people had passed a couple of years ago, if they didn't have the resources to have a cremation, they would just bury them and then dig them back up to put them through a cremation. Wow.
So my family member has been buried for 3 years, and we've now got the right number, and it comes around every 4 years that we do this. So I'll go and dig him up now, wrapped in Muslim, take him over, put him in a new cloth if he needs to be in a new cloth. And for each person to transition, they'll have a symbol, a totem. So they build totems out of and they're elaborate and all done. It's very personal and intimate to build this for your family member. So this is a pig, or this is a oxen, or this is a whatever. So each person is born with a totem, and that's what goes on their cremation pyre. And then there's 40 of them in this big fire, and they light the lot, and they have the ceremony, which of course involves lots of drinking and celebration and passing, releasing the spirit from this, because they've been in a holding pattern while they're just buried, to being released to their next life. Some of it was quite graphic, and some of the girls were like, we don't want to know any more about that. But it wasn't in a gratuitous way. It was just about completely sharing, this is how, that's just right there where we bury them. So there's new red, they're not a poppy, but it's a decorative tropical flower, which marks each of the sites. And you can see there's only a few over there because we've just recently had the cremation.
The ceremony,
Yeah.
It's interesting that, and there's probably something for us to take from that. We have talked about, how does ceremony fit in with the idea of group identity, and that's a very, powerful experience or articulation of something, which, is pretty important, being, birth, deaths, and marriages.
Yeah. From there, we rode to a private residence. So this is village living in Bali.
Mm-hmm.
And we had sort of the two options. The touristy option was come and see a coffee plantation. And I said, look, if we have an opportunity to see a private residence, there was 4 of us in the group. We sort of had a bit of a show of hands, who wants to do what. So we ended up seeing the private residence, which is, again, down a little laneway, fences right onto the road. The whole thing's a death trap, right? The road is literally 1 lane wide. The gutters are tropical rainfall, so they're 400 mil deep, concrete, 200 wide, and then 6-foot fence. So just, if you wanted to injure somebody, that's exactly what you'd send them down at 60 kilometres an hour. And they just don't. There's dogs coming out to welcome you. How you going? So it's wind down these little streets, then you duck through their gate into their property, and gorgeous, simple, all built by themselves. The family's plot stays in the family. They don't buy and sell in the way we do real estate. They have a patch, and the boys stay there, then girls marry off, is sort of typically how that works. If the grandparents had only daughters, for example, and they've both been married off, they might import a nephew to come and continue in their older age. So their concept of being infirm and going to a nursing home is just like, you do what? You cannot do that. We belong. This is our land.
How big are the parcels?
A quarter-acre block. So they're a fairly decent block. But the first component is the temple. So the north orientation, the north quadrant of the block, temple's built first. Each family has 1 bathroom, 1 kitchen, no power. They have got running water. Built themselves, and so they extend and build it as they need more family members. I've had 2 daughters, or I had 2 sons, and I need to build another living quarters. They just build it on that block. But
what are they built out of?
Concrete.
Oh, really?
Hand mixed concrete everywhere, everywhere.
Wow.
So the structure is a portal. The outside 4 walls and overhead over roof is timber, would be exotic rainforest that's been destroyed generally. Although the example that we looked at had a very modern stud and track truss system, because the cost of the hardwood timber was getting too much.
Yeah, right.
So they're taking their pragmatic approach that, yes, we've always used natural feng shui, local materials, but it's got out of our control, or maybe there's some conversation around the scarcity of hardwood timber.
Yes.
And so they're now going to a stud and track light gauge, clipped together like Meccano. Still beautifully decorated, still beautifully finished. So there's concrete walls, 100 mil blocks. So absolutely no stability. Doesn't blow down in cyclones. So
that's right.
4 pillar perimeters has got enough strength. Big solid beam, concrete beam over the top, cast in place, mixed by hand. They're fit.
Quality control. Yeah, it'll be about right. Yeah, that's right. Looks about right.
How grey is it? Oh, that's grey enough. That'll do.
Yeah.
But constantly stunned by, I could go on for too long, so I'll stop. But healthy, fit, agile, because they are physically doing all this work themselves.
Yeah.
Still very little machinery taking over. They're not sitting on couches.
And so do you find, though, with all that, small amount of what we would class as necessities, how are they in themselves? Do they seem like a cohesive, happy group of people? Or?
Absolutely. And so you would expect within a family group, when we've turned up and there's an offer of some money and we're going to have a visit at the house, you get a pretty good welcome. So into the kitchen, help yourself to the fridge, help yourself to the larder. The chook's been cooked this morning, and it's the same chook. You're welcome to have it. We're eating it for dinner. So that was sort of very welcoming. But also driving to locations where there was a little spill on a scooter, the shopkeepers hop up, run to the middle of the road in amongst 47 moving vehicles, pick him up, pick up the bike, carry him across the side of the road, dust him off, back to their shop. So there's no accusations or upset.
Lawsuits.
A truck of delivery of dirt. So I'll describe the roads. You've got a picture of the roads? Old mate wants 5 ton of dirt. Well, he stops the truck at the front of his house and tips the dirt on the road. Traffic control, it just doesn't exist.
No.
But all the family then have got the kids have got a pannikin. Mum's got the big salad bowl, or a big size bowl. Dad's got a whole bucket, and they're in the traffic shoveling this dirt from there off the road. Oh, we've got to get it off the road, and no aggro.
I think that's actually a good segue into I found a very similar thing with my conversation last week with Colby, and I think this might weave its way back even into our conversation from Thursday. But, so I started off having the chat with Colby, and we were talking, what do humans want from their housing? And we've seen, this whole discussion around humans today, we've weaved around there. But his specific experience is around being a student, right? So it was a lot of, for me, I had a lot of intrigue in regards to, how are uni students living in the greater community? And there seems to be this big polarizing movement of, someone like Colby, who happens to be lucky enough to be in the town that he's going to uni, so he can stay with his parents, and that makes a lot of sense. We love having our kids around, and he also gets the benefit of obviously reduction of costs and all that sort of stuff. But then you have the other group of people who their parents maybe are wealthy enough to either pay for an apartment for them or to buy them one. And then you have the third group of people who ultimately the first instinct is to, we'll go onto campus, so we'll go onto the actual university and see whether that works as an outcome. And then quickly they find, by the sounds of it, from the majority of people, that you're all forced together. There's not a lot of common bond. There's not a lot of community. A lot of people retreat to their room and then rush outside to use the kitchen and then rush back in. And then after a period of time, what seems to happen is like-minded groups start to come together. So you go to university and you start having a chat, and then you say, hey, you sound like one of my peeps. And then you extend the conversation, and then you say, look, I'm in this barrack or that barrack or wherever campus you're on. Why don't we bandy together and go and get a place of ourselves together? Now, I thought that sounded like madness to me. From everything we know about what happens when groups organically feed together, I thought, surely that's got to be there's got to be a world of pain there as far as everyone living together and that sort of stuff. And so I started to probe Colby in regards to, how does that work? How do people get on? And interestingly enough, in the chat, I don't know whether you'll be able to see the chat in the actual podcast, but in the chat, one of Colby's, and obviously they knew he was on the podcast, so they're probably, joining in to take the mickey out of him. But one thing that they said was, I said, well, how do you get around the fact that what happens if someone leaves the pan on the kitchen or whatever? And they wrote care in the comments. And I was like, what care, And I was like, what are they talking about? And then they went on to go, well, we care for the other people in the house and we care for the group. And I thought, holy shit, like that's, to me, like a 20-year-old me was like giving a care for everyone else, probably not as much as I should have, but it says that when your group is formed for a reason, and like you said before, Christine, with a purpose, then you build this care for each other. And with that care becomes a level of support and empathy and all of those things. And, they all come from different parts of the world and different parts of Australia. And, in this modern world,
Oh, you've disappeared again, Darren. But I think what you're saying is that, that same alignment that Rowan was noticing and that we've seen in other countries is what those young people were expressing.
Yes.
You'll have to repeat what you were saying, Darren, because we missed you. Oh,
he's gone together now.
He disappeared. But isn't that interesting? Because, of course, Gen Z has a completely different reputation than that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, from an employer or from my demographic as a 50-year-old bloke, it's 50-something. There's all this fear and trepidation about, they can't be corralled, they can't be taught, whatever. But in actual fact, that's a pretty enormous amount of teamwork right there.
Yeah.
And prejudice from us oldies is that the way they're doing it can't work, but it does somehow.
Yeah.
And yet the rest of us are saying, oh, well, the ideal job for a Gen Z is to hide in a closet and code all day. They don't want to talk to anybody. They don't want to be in it. They don't want to care for anyone. Bullshit.
Yeah.
Bullshit. A lot of those people young people have an enormous capacity for the emotional alignment that, for me, as a total baby boomer, 1949, I mean, I am a boomer if there ever was a boomer, and was a hippie, of course, American hippie as a boomer.
Yes.
We just, so we had a lot of those ideas, but we couldn't put them into practice. And apparently Gen Z can do better.
Yeah. And I was majorly impressed by that. And my takeaways from that was also that there was an intention for their formation. Yeah. And I think, and a shared reason to do it. And I think that's a little bit coming back to what I found on Thursday is, as you alluded to, we were a group of 7 people. As you said, 4 of us knew each other with, to some extent, filters in the way. Like a few of us had never really caught up face to face.
Yeah.
But we had an intention to be there for a reason, and also a level of care, because I think that was built by starting off with an understanding of our shared challenges of life. You talked about everyone's health issues. I think that was a great way for us to galvanize as a group.
Well, it certainly was not one of those meetings where everybody tried to one-up everybody else. There wasn't any one-upmanship. There wasn't any, oh, I'm going to be more intellectually brilliant, or I'm going to be better behaved, or I'm going to look good. None of that. And what I'm hearing, what you're saying about your Gen Z son and his friends, is that they also weren't trying to impress each other. They were trying to emotionally align and care for each other. Now, how beautiful is that? And if it's possible for a 19-year-old male to do that, can a 73-year-old woman do it too? I think we're not. I mean, we have to be capable of that amount of, say, Balinese spirituality and harmony, of that, of those young people who are Gen Z, of their care for each other. And I think that's just beautiful. So I think we brought up some really important points that are really, these are the things that the 3 of us have been very dedicated to for a very long time. And we're finally perhaps getting to the point where we can do it.
And I think also the other part of it is, I mean, we've been learning Like a lot of those stuff has been forming organically and developing. But as we continue to have these experiences and learn from each other and our shared experiences, hopefully we can build, what we're building in the background is a toolkit which says, look, these are the things that naturally worked. Why not replicate the things that naturally work and find ways to enhance them, but then also give a framework around the outside for when things we know inherently human don't work all the time. So how do we deal with the exceptions when it don't work and when pure care for each other isn't enough? What are the things that we can fill in between that so we can help to move that to the next level? And that, that's the exciting part, is if we can tap into the good starts and then extend that into using tools that can help enhance that, what could that look like?
For me, the key part is that starting seed, and we use words like purpose, but they could be that you're a group of engineering students, or you could have some common goal. It doesn't need to be a particularly lofty purpose.
No.
But if you have a starting point that gets you to the starting blocks of the journey, and you have the ability to do some of that work, I think that is all we need. And we keep referring back to sufficient. Thankfully, talent is not high on our list of priorities because I'm still here. I have sufficient to get the job done. Don't need to be perfect, but willing to put my hand up when I do make a mistake. And we are, we're here to make the learnings. And some of those learnings I've had to repeat a few times, but
a few. Yeah.
But we've all gone on, part of that is we've all gone on that journey together. And I think by going through this process, we built a really strong group. And that was, and probably, and maybe this is part of it as well, Christine. I wonder whether, because we had so much trust for the people who already had built relationships in that group, that anyone else coming in there probably, or, where to some extent humans are very good at, picking up the vibe, that's probably a very hippie thing to say, but in the room, it was probably a high level of comfort. And I think you do a lot of that, and you probably don't even realize it, Christine. So I have noticed that you're very good at cutting through difficult conversations, because, we're all aware that from a health point of view, some people in that group are under more stress than others. But you were able to normalize that in conversation by expressing your own experience, but also a high level of honesty. Like we didn't beat around the bush when people weren't. Jane, if you need to lay down, lay down. Like if you need to stand up, stand up. If you need to do whatever, that's 100% fine. If you need a drink, get a drink. And I think
if you need to fall asleep. No problem. Join the group again later. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you for that, Darren. I don't really feel that that's a talent of mine, but I feel that's more a talent of Rowan's.
Yep, I agree with you there.
A thing that Rowan has developed. I think you have more talent than me, Rowan, for that. But you've developed it more. But I'm very grateful that you've said that to me. Thank you, Darren.
No, it was something that I just actually acknowledged, because I think you and I are quite similar in some ways on that point of view. We can look at things too philosophically and not too enough human sometimes. But I did notice, and that is an area where Rowan is, very comfortable in being a human, which you and I aren't good at being humans all the time. But I did happen to notice that you were, the galvanizing component of that conversation. So. Which is great learning as well.
And I guess part of the experience is going to be all shapes and types turn up. So if they come from whatever, they might be an accountant, which might be traditionally seen as this particular kind of person. But if they've turned up, they've got a purpose, they've got some level, and they might speak to their own peeps. You might end up with groups that these are all CPA accountants who've all done high-level jobs, but now find they have a sense of purpose to rehabilitate a bit of rainforest or whatever.
Yeah.
I think that's an important part, and I think maybe we talked about this, and this might be a good segue to go towards wrapping up tonight. But we talked about it expanding. Like, this was more the experiences we had are almost like thematic observations. Like, we were just experiencing what is and what was, and enjoying how that got to a natural state of alignment. But we've also talked about, as you just alluded to there, I'd really love to, and it's going to get a bit heavy going for anyone who logs in, but I think Christine's idea of integral housing, I think maybe tries to formalize our understanding of the nuances which we're picking up by feel, and geez, that worked well. Why did this group care for each other, and why didn't they? And what makes people more aligned to fit together? I think I'd love to dive deeper into maybe some of the technical philosophical bits as well as the human bits. And maybe that's a good balance for us. I mean, I think we've been doing the podcast now for, whatever it is, 10 or 11 weeks or whatever. And we're finding this balance between unpicking the technical bits and increasing our human understanding of those around us. And I hope we've got some other people I've spoken to just recently. I'm really excited that maybe we can get into that rhythm of, digging in and unpacking the technical bits and the philosophical bits, but then reintroducing the human stories, because just in the last week, how powerful that's been for our own understanding. And to be honest with you, I had a real concern about whether we'd be able to break through the human componentry, but so many of the conversations we've had in the last week have just given me so much positivity to the fact that humans inherently want to do this. We've just got to help them be the best version of themselves and get out of the way.
Yeah.
And we've got to continue to be the best version of ourselves.
Very good point.
Just make that better and better, because that's where that's what leadership is, isn't it? I mean, when you come right down to it, is try to be the best version of yourself.
Yeah. And then we sit by a fire and tell stories and share those stories as the continual learning for the next generation, or the next incarnation. So it doesn't have to be children following our footsteps. It can be the house down the road that wants to take this on in their own version of it. I'm pretty excited about seeing that evolve into small town or suburb wise, where you have contrasting and complementary projects working close enough that they can feed themselves.
Absolutely. And we even chatted today, Rowan, about this idea that a lot of this learning can turn into open source experience, as we continue to learn these things about, one, how to be the best version of ourselves to be part of a high performing group, that also what are the tools that others can use to be the best versions of their own group, whatever their particular direction is. And then hopefully we can help them, find a place for themselves which is aligned with their purpose, to get to that point of, going, wow, this is how I want to live. This is how my life is supposed to be.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, I think that's been a really great catch up, and it's really fantastic to have all three of us back in the same conversation. And it's been, for me, me finishing off to have my closeout. I've really enjoyed the conversation tonight and got a hell of a lot of inspiration out of it, and I suppose motivation to continue on this journey. What about yourself, Christine?
Well, one of the continuing thoughts I've had during this conversation is how important it is for us to learn from Gen Z. Because it isn't as though we have the wisdom and we pass it on to them. We've learned certain things in our lives, but they've already started at a different point. I mean, being born in 1949 is a lot different to being born in the 21st century.
Yes.
And I think that what we really don't want to do is go off the rails trying to be Hindus and Balinese, or go off the rails trying to be something. But how do we incorporate
not look at it as, well, I have the wisdom and I pass it on to you because I'm old. It's not like that. I'm old enough that I want to learn from the Colbys of this world, not just try to teach. So that would be my final. And that's I'm really glad that I've been having that thought over and over as we've been talking. It's been a lovely conversation. You, Rowan?
Thank you, and blessed to be back. I must say, happy to be back on this Australian community, which has so many positives in it. Some of the stuff in Bali and abject poverty is really a bit unsettling for me, but also aware that need to go and be unsettled, right? So not just in a gym where I'm comfortable and I think, okay, that's a bit heavy and I'll give it a go. I need to be uncomfortable and unsettled in other ways to continue to develop. So there'll be some lumps along the way, but I really enjoy your mentorship, insight, companionship, because I know I'm a much better person for it.
Awesome.
Thank you.
And me too.
I feel the same.
Absolutely.
Beautiful, Rowan. Thank you for finishing us up on that point.
All righty. Have a good evening.
Have a great time. Speak again soon.
Thanks, eh?
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. See ya.